Welcome to The Vinyl Guide, the podcast for record collectors and music nerds. Here's your host, the biggest record nerd of them all, Nate Goyer.
Oh man, here we are. Welcome to episode 500 of The Vinyl Guide, the podcast for record collectors and music nerds. And ladies and gentlemen, episode 500, I am so proud to be sharing today's episode with you. And I would ask you just for a couple of minutes, allow me to indulge. There's a lot of stuff going on around episode 500, and I want to make sure I share it and I set the table correctly because there's a lot going on. So I know people like to fast forward sometimes through the beginnings of podcasts. Please don't do this one. Just give me a few moments because I think you'll enjoy it more when you see all the moving parts here. So we've been building up to episode 500. We've been here 10 years now. And every week putting out episodes, sometimes multiple times a week. And we're very proud of and work hard on every episode. However, every time we hit a milestone like 100 or 200, 300, etc., we try to make it a bit extra special. I try to get some of those people that I've always wanted to have on the show. I've got a list of folks, the top gets that I want on the show, that I know are record collectors, that I know would have interesting stories, but I just haven't been able to land them as of yet. And it can be very tricky to get a guest on. A lot of times they may be willing to talk, but they don't have something to promote, or they're busy, or the stars don't align, and that's okay. But when it comes time for these milestones, we really try extra hard. So, for example, episode 100 was Henry Rollins, the first time he was on the show. Episode 200 was Stephen Van Zandt of E Street Band and Underground Garage. Episode 300 was Peter Frampton. 400 was Mark Maron. So when it came to 500, I knew we had to dig deep. And I started reaching out to my contacts and the PR agents and everything. And to my humbling surprise, we started getting back a bunch of yeses. And that was phenomenal news. I mean, maybe it's due to the popularity of the podcast. Maybe they felt sorry for me, but whatever it was, I got so many positive responses. I got gloriously overwhelmed and have really spent the last few months preparing and conducting some incredible interviews, which you will hear over the coming weeks. So here's what's going to happen. There will not be a single episode 500. There will be multiple episode 500s throughout the month of June 2025. Each Monday, we will share another episode 500 with a new and very special guest. The sequence of them is in no particular order. It's the order that I recorded them. The order that they said yes and the order that I got them recorded, that's the order that we will be presenting them. So today, Billy Corgan, he was the first cab off the rank, and you're going to love this conversation. We talked to Billy about Smashing Pumpkins. He's constantly making new music and putting out and revisiting some of his past works. He's one of the busiest fellas on the planet, yet he took time away from his guitar, his mixing console, his wrestling empire, his podcast, and his book and family to speak to us today about his love of vinyl records, his history of collecting. We talk about the rare vinyl of Smashing Pumpkins and other projects. Billy gives us a peek into what's coming up. He discusses the whole Machina vinyl saga and the upcoming Billy Corgan and the Machines of God box set, which I believe goes live for pre-order on June 27th at Madame ZuZu's. That's a huge deal. You listen to the interview today, you'll hear the whole story. You want to put June 27th in your calendar, or schedule it in your Palm Pilot or whatever, but you're going to want to grab one on the day from Madame ZuZu's. So today is Billy Corgan. Over the next several Mondays of June 2025, there will be some new names appearing in your podcast app, which some incredible conversations, which I think you guys are really going to enjoy. So make sure you are following the podcast in your podcast app. You will be sure to enjoy the podcast the moment they become available. Now, to help extend the celebration of 500 beyond June, I'm giving away 30 amazing collectible records through the month of June. Every day I will post one in our Instagram at Vinyl Guide. 30 killer and collectible records giving away for free. And all you have to do is enter your name and info at thevinylguide.com/500. Okay, that's the URL, thevinylguide.com/500. You don't need to enter more than once. One time is plenty. Throughout the month, I'll be choosing people and sending out some records. It's as simple as that. If you want to see what we're giving away, go to our Instagram feed at Vinyl Guide. Some incredible and collectible titles of my own personal collection. People are saying, why are you giving these things away? And I said, well, who knows why? People will enjoy them. Let's have some fun with it. Let's throw them out in the universe and see what happens. So there it is. Enter now your information to collect some records, thevinylguide.com/500. And finally, Patreon supporters, you guys are going to get extra stuff too. I've been thinking about you. I got some interesting plans coming up. So everyone, if you've ever thought about joining our Patreon page and helping support the show, now is the perfect time. Patreon.com/vinylguide. It helps support the show. You get extra stuff too. So there we are. Patreon.com/vinylguide. Join us there and help support the show. All right, so without any further pomp and circumstance, let's get into our conversation with Billy Corgan, record collector.
You all good? You need a cup of tea or a coffee or anything before we get started?
Oh no, I was just working on my book, so that's where I lost track of time.
Man, are you able to share anything about the book, or is that kind of a under wraps as well?
Oh no, I mean it's something I've talked about for like 10 years, and I've just never finished it. So my wife says I've started it 4 times.
And how far through it do you think, percentage wise?
Having restarted again, I think I'm really only about 10% in or something.
Okay, all right. So we may see something by 2030.
Well, the hope here is to write it in pieces and put it out in pieces.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's interesting. Similar to like the music model. You don't have to save up for a big album. You could just put song by song out now.
Yeah. Well, I had written close to 500,000 words. I had a book deal before, and I turned in the half book, and they loved it, but they wanted me to finish the whole thing before they put the thing out, because I think they were worried if something happened to me in putting it out, they'd have an incomplete manuscript. And then it just became too odious a thing to try to navigate, a 1,000,000-word book or something. It was just too much for me and I just never finished it.
Got it. Okay. All right. Well, this way you got it on your own terms and you can kind of take your time with it. That's nice.
Story of my life.
It is. So, Billy, thank you for joining us today. Now, this podcast is about record collecting, collectibles, that sort of thing. And I see enough pictures of you in various record shops around the world to where I imagine you are a bit of a record collector. Would that be fair?
I don't know if I'd call myself a record collector. I do like to buy lots of records. I'm not as fussy about it all as a lot of people seem to be. And I'm not a big fan of like trying to collect variants and stuff like that. I know people are, and we certainly provide to that community in my own releases. But I'm more of if I find what I'm looking for. So if I find a mono version of a record that I really want from the 60s, I'm not really hung up, but if it's the perfect cover or something, it's more about the condition of the vinyl for me.
Okay. All right. So you're not looking for filler copies of something. You want something that will sound great. And if it's stereo or mono, it's secondary concern.
No. What I'm saying is I'm picky about what I want, but past that, I'm not picky. So if I'm after a clean mono copy of an association record, I'll go out and get it, or I'll buy it off of eBay, but I'm not really hung up if the record cover is not in perfect condition, or it's the Canadian version or so. I'm not that guy. For me, it's about clean vinyl of whatever copy I'm looking for. I love mono. I have a crazy mono collection alongside of stereo stuff. But I used to work at a used record store back in the 80s. And so I know the record collector mind, and that's just not me.
It's a pretty deep well.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful thing. It's really beautiful. And I certainly appreciate it when people collect my stuff at depth. I mean, I know fans who have crazier stuff than I have, and I pretty much have the ultimate collection with, test pressings and stuff like that. So I appreciate all that. It's not my personality. I'm more of a completist when it comes to audio.
Is there a particular band or bandwidth that you tend to gravitate towards? You said mono seems to be kind of one of those major areas. Is there a band or a genre or a period of time you tend to look for more than others?
Well, I grew up generally poor, and I didn't have a lot of money in my youth, and particularly in the early years of the band. So when I did get some money and I could kind of quote unquote buy whatever I wanted, I bought everything that I thought I wanted, every Sabbath record and every Zeppelin record and whatever. And then once I kind of ran out of all that stuff, I still wanted to collect things. So I started this project. I don't even know what I would call it, which is I constantly look for major label vinyl from the 60s and 70s that seems obscure and I don't recognize. And like I said, having worked at a record store, you get a pretty cursory knowledge of what's out there.
Right.
And oftentimes LA is the perfect spot. And maybe it's because it was the epicenter of the music business. So I'll find major label releases produced by name people. And I've never heard of the band. You can't find any information online. It's astonishing how many major label records were put out in the 60s and 70s that really there isn't much trace of them.
Mm-hmm.
And so I tend to collect that type of stuff. It's not important to me whether or not it's good. I just kind of want to have this record of the stuff that kind of fell between the cracks. And usually if I put those records on, I'll find one or two things that I really like. And the hope one day is to kind of compile it all into something, but God knows if it'll ever happen.
Like an archaeologist almost.
Well, I don't know. It's just my personality. That's the part of me that's sort of curious. I will go to the ends of the earth to find like weird, obscure psych bands and stuff like that, long forgotten things. And that stuff I care about. I don't know why. Jazz, I love a lot of jazz, particularly. I'm a big fan of jazz on 10-inch records, particularly like late 50s, early 60s. This is something about the way jazz sounds on that type of shellac that sounds different to me than, say, a mono or stereo LP from the time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very particular. And it really, if you saw my record collection, has no rhyme or reason.
Is it in any sort of orders, or is it?
No, it's a total mess. I mean, I'll come home. I think the last time I went on tour, I think I bought probably 1,000 records on the tour. And this is all, it's all clean vinyl. It's all things, I have enough of memory that I'll remember, I don't know, the Tex Ritter album that I don't have. And there's, just 45 of them. So for some reason, I'll buy every Tex Ritter vinyl that I can find that's clean. And then I'll also buy records that I really like if I find clean copies, even if I have that record.
Oh,
so if it's like Crosby, Stills and Nash's first record, I probably have 5-6 clean copies. I do a little bit of reselling at my tea house in Highland Park, Illinois. So some of that stuff gets put into that pile. But I just believe in kind of owning and possessing clean vinyl, and especially if you can find it for a good price.
Yeah, there's many records that I'll see if they're in good shape and they're cheap enough, I'll pick it up, but I'll just give them to people like a prescription. Like,
that's cool.
You need to hear this.
I need a friend like you.
Yeah, there's a couple of like Miles Davis. I could never pass up a copy of Tribute to Jack Johnson. If it's under $20, it's coming home with me.
Yeah, and like some of those Miles records, for example, there's a lot of great music there that isn't necessarily heavily favored by fans. You can find some really good stuff. You just got to dig. And so I'm kind of that guy. And maybe that's having worked in a record store. I kind of know what I am interested in. So I have really interesting spurs of country, jazz, psych. And then if it's a band like that I like the Stones, I'm willing to put up pretty big money to say, I think I have like a mono promo copy of Sticky Fingers, for example.
Wow.
Not something that's easily found. And that's where I would be willing to bend condition, because the condition of that's probably somewhere in the middle. It's not great and it's not bad. But generally speaking, anything else that's got to be clean. Otherwise I just don't bother. And we've all had that moment where you find like the golden record that you're looking for, and it's like, it's like somebody jumped up and down it with spikes in their feet.
Do you, I mean, aside from the Smashing Pumpkins, your material, do you have anything that's like a holy grail, something that's like, top of the mountain for your collection?
No, I mean, holy grails for me would be things like I bought a sealed mono copy of White Light, White Heat by Velvet Underground. I bought once a sealed mono copy of Incense and Peppermints by the Strawberry Alarm Clock, because I was friends with one of the guys in the band. So stuff like that means a lot to me, but I'm not a holy grail type collector. I think that's what makes me unusual. I'll give you it's probably would be no surprise that some people recognize me when I go to shop at a record store, but not everybody does. Mm-hmm. But the most common refrain I hear when I bring up whatever pile I found is like, oh, you're interesting. You know what I mean? Because they try to kind of judge you based on what you're buying.
Yeah.
There's really no rhyme or reason to what I buy. It's just whatever I'm interested in.
All right. Well, you just mentioned a little bit ago, you guys create quite a few records that inspire that same sort of excitement in fans and listeners. Very keen to hear a little bit more about this Machines of God box set, because that contains what have been very difficult to get records for many years.
Sure. Well, you want a little historical part of it to set it up, or
Please,
is that okay?
please.
Yeah. So in 1999, the band reformed as a quartet to do what would be our last record, which was then Virgin Records, which I think had been bought by EMI at that point. Richard Bramson was out, so it was kind of under new ownership. We were being treated kind of poorly by the record company, even though we'd sold a gazillion records just a few years prior. So the plan was to make one more record. It would be the end of the record deal, and that would be that. I wrote a sprawling concept record called Machina, which was both about whatever I was experiencing at the time, but also sort of dealt in a kind of detached way with the band breaking up. Basically the band was a concept record where the band was supposed to play a version of itself. The whole thing kind of fall apart as we made it. We never completely finished the record as it was intended. And at some point, the producer, Flood, came to me and said, we have to eject out of this plane before it crashes. So rather than finish the work, I think we released a 15, 16 song album, which was just called Machina, the Machines of God, which was like almost, if you can imagine, if you wrote this whole soundtrack and you just cherry plucked some of the songs and made a record, which wasn't necessarily cohesive, but people liked, sort of. Right. Fans at the time hated it, but is now considered quite a good record. But it really wasn't a representation of the work. So the band goes on tour. We went on an 11-month tour, knowing that the band was going to break up at the end of this run. Basically, we would end up breaking up at the end of 2000. But just before that, we had about 3 weeks off. And I knew that all the leftover music that had been recorded during the session, I knew that if I didn't complete it in those 3 weeks, it would never be finished. Meaning, even if I just would finish it and say, put it in a box, there was no way I was going to pick it up 10 years later and finish it. So I used the 3 weeks of time that I had back in Chicago to finish whatever recordings were left with producer engineer Howard Willing. Anyway, in that 3 weeks, I kind of caught this interesting wind at my back. I ended up writing some more stuff. I finished a bunch of stuff, wrote lyrics. I mean, everything was done in haste, but kind of on the fly. I thought it was, I thought it had something to it. And so I called up the record company. And even though we were out of the record deal, I said, this might be something you might be interested in, because Machina, the record that was out, hadn't sold up to their satisfaction. I said, look, if we put this record out, it won't cost you anything, and it'll be a promotional tool to sell the record that you actually do own. And they told me to basically fuck off. Not in business terms, but they told me to fuck off. And in a moment of, I guess, churlish anger, I just dumped the record on the internet. Now, no one had ever done anything like that before that I know of. People often cite Radiohead as the first band that did it, but we did it in 2000. And not only did we put out a complete record, but basically about 14 songs, but the record had additional materials, B-sides. So I think we put out 2 10-inch records and one album called what fans know as Machina II, and that's The Friends and Enemies of Modern Music is the subtitle of that record. Okay, so the record, I guess in modern terms, you would say it became a viral sensation. Fans loved this record, which wasn't not necessarily meant to see the light of day. It only came out because I was mad. And it caught fire. Mm-hmm. So suddenly now everybody's talking about us again, and everybody's talking about this record. So the record company calls me back up and says, well, I guess we missed the boat on putting it out, but can we get involved? Because we do see now a promotional opportunity to sell the record that we do own, which was Machina I. So I authorized them. They did some kind of, I think what they did is they did like a vinyl rip, maybe. So there are CD copies that are called like the EMI Virgin CD copies, which is a different version than the actual official version. I produced 25 vinyl copies. I think I have a few left. I sent one to Robert Smith of The Cure, for example. He's got one. I sent a few to fans, and they of course put them on the internet. And so there are those copies that are floating out, and occasionally one will come up and be sold for, tens of thousands of dollars. And those were all kind of basically handmade. I guess you would call them in record parlance a private press. There's only these 25 copies. So over time, this whole contrivance, which honestly happened mostly organically, kind of took on a legend of its own. So when we made the, I swear I'm getting to an end. It's just very complicated. You did ask for this.
These are the sort of details we love.
Okay, so, good. I don't want to bore your audience.
No, not at all.
Okay, so around 2010 or so, when we made a deal with whoever owned the catalog at that point. So the band owned everything not released. So everything Machina II the band owns, and everything Machina I is a co-own with whoever owns the copyright, which at this point is Universal. Whoever I made the deal with around 2010, as part of the deal to put out Gish as a box set, Siamese as a box set with extra materials, the standard fare that everybody else does. I said, if we're going to have Machina, I have to be allowed to put together Machina as it was originally intended and recorded. In essence, let me finish the movie. And they agreed to this. Okay, fine. So we put out Gish, Siamese, blah, blah, blah. So eventually we get around to Machina. Well, I think the thing's been roughly done for about 3 years. When we got to the point of handing it in with now who owned the copyright, which was Universal Music, they weren't so enthusiastic about the idea of putting out the Machina I and Machina II reconstituted version. So it begins a 3-year kind of scrum, to be polite about it. Lawyers were involved. And eventually now the box set in its complete form is going to come out through my tea house, madamezuzuz.com. It'll be the only place you can get it. It's 80 songs. The reconstituted album, which is 48 songs long with 32 extra tracks, alternate versions and things like that.
Right. So let me ask you a few questions.
Oh, wait, one other thing.
Okay.
And then Universal is going to reissue Machina I as is, remastered.
Okay. So Machina I, I've got a vinyl copy of that. That's very hard to get these days. Not nearly as hard as Machina II, obviously. But now, will this new box set will have Machina I in it?
Oh no, it's Machina I and Machina II Basically, it's the movie properly edited.
Will they be intermixed? So
oh yeah.
Okay. So
it's again, Machina I would be like you coming to me and I've got a 4-hour movie, and you go, hey, you got to put out this thing and edit it into an hour and a half.
Right.
So I just kind of chose whatever seemed to kind of go together at the time. There was no theoretical rhyme or reason why the record was sequenced that way. It was like a snapshot of the bigger movie. So the box set is the full movie. Machina I, of course, is the reissue of the original Virgin EMI record.
Got it.
Oh, so that'll have the original art. It's remastered by Howie Weinberg, who did the original mastering. It sounds fantastic. There are a few things on there that are, definitely spruced up, and it sounds way better than the let's call it the 2000 pressing. And of course that'll go on streaming as well. And then ZuZu's will have the box set, and in the beginning it'll only be available. So if you want to hear the reconstituted Machina I, Machina II, the full movie plus extra tracks, you can only get that music through madamezuzuz.com.
Got it. All right. And when does that go on sale?
I hate to quote the date. I think what was agreed upon between my wife, who does all the retail for our world, and Universal, was I think it's all going to be put out or announced for sale kind of on the same date. I think we're going to go into pre-sale, and I think their version will actually come out. Don't quote me on that though.
That's fine. This will probably go out around the end of May. So that's why I'm trying to see.
It might be actually around that time.
Okay.
That seems to jive in my mind.
All right. So there's going to be the box. Are there going to be different versions of the box set, like a blue colored version or a small number run of a special type or anything?
No. There'll be only one run of the box set.
All right. So there's a lot of material in there, and that's these Machina tracks. Now, they're originally as you envisioned it. Now, I imagine you still have all the tapes, all the masters, all the multi-tracks. Did you go in and do remixing along with the remastering as well?
For the non-Machina I stuff, we did extensive remixing and remastering, and in some cases even some additional recording to kind of basically complete the cut. Because again, all the stuff that was out on the internet in 2000 was all done very, very quickly, including the mixes.
Right.
So this was a chance to really restore the material up to the fidelity level of Machina I, but also where it gets complicated is some of the tapes were lost.
Okay.
And it's a long story that I don't want to tell today, but so we had to kind of source what we did have and what we didn't have. And what would be maddening was sometimes we would have one reel of a 2-reel thing.
Oh.
So we would have like drums, bass, and guitar, but no vocal. Or we'd have drums dumped to a reel with vocals, but no ability to mix the drums and the bass or some shit like that. So it got complicated, and as you can imagine, producing for the box set alone, producing 80 masters, whether they were remixed and remastered or just remastered, finding the correct versions, comparing them to old versions, figuring out what was what. Oftentimes, the version chosen for Machina I wasn't starred or indicated. So it was a ton of detective work and a ton of forensic work.
Okay, so let's go back to the year 2000 quickly. Machina II, you distributed it on 25, as I understand, 25 vinyl versions. You said a private press. Were they acetates? Were they hand recorded in real time, or did actual pressing plates be made to make those 25?
I think we knew somebody who could cut them one at a time. Okay. That's my memory. Most people who had them, of course, would only play them once, rip them, and then, understand that they had a collector's item. So I would assume that the copies that are out there have not been played much. I know my copies I've never played because obviously I don't need to. So yeah, I honestly, I don't really know. My memory is that we didn't do a production run. I think it was a guy with a hand lathe who had the ability back then to cut each record one at a time. So it probably, I guess you would consider it a form of acetate.
Right.
But I've never heard anybody say they degraded like an acetate.
Right. Okay. And the artwork, was it like a hand silk screen or drawing? Do you remember how
we did something sort of interesting because it was a rush job as well. I commissioned somebody to make like a certain type of. We found a company that could make tape that you could print on.
Mm-hmm.
So we printed this kind of, I don't know, I seem to remember stealing the images from somewhere. And so what we did is we took normal black jackets and then wrapped them in the tape. The idea being that every one of the 25 is wrapped differently. So they're all basically objects of their own making. So no two is essentially alike. And then there were paper inserts featuring photographs that I'd taken.
Okay. In this box set, is there going to be kind of a recreation of that artwork as well?
No. The box set has completely newly commissioned art. So Machina I will have the original Vasily Kafanov art from 2000. Otherwise, all the other materials associated with the ZuZu's version are newly commissioned work.
Right. Okay. All right. Now, you said you sent out 25. One of them you recall was to Robert Smith. Anyone else you recall that received that mysterious FedEx package?
Well, there was one fan that we were friendly with at the time, and we knew that he would immediately dump on the internet, which he did.
And that was your instructions to him. Please share this.
I remember, but I have a sort of sour opinion of the guy now.
Oh, okay.
He was one of those fans that professed, we were the greatest band in the world, and then at some point we were no longer the greatest band in the world. So I'm not a big fan of those types of people, because I think we were very naive at the time. It seems silly now to talk about it 25 years later, but at the time, I think we were really unwise to what we would now call an influencer. And in any community, could be record collecting community, there are people who kind of rise themselves up as I'm the guy with the knowledge. I'm the guy who has the tape you've never heard. And, generally speaking, those people become gatekeepers. And in a way, they trade off their influence. So in this case, he was trading off his influence to his access to the band as a way to gain influence online. But eventually, to gain more influence online, he turned on the band, which sounds like something out of wrestling. We did the guy the greatest favors he ever had, but somehow we ended up being the bad guys.
Right.
So I'm just not a fan of those types of people. I've just seen way too many of those. So I regret giving it to that guy.
All right, but you said you still have a few kind of in the archive.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I would estimate I have about 3 or 4 copies. The rest I gave away. I feel like I gave one to each of the guys in the band, and a couple friends, but honestly, I couldn't remember. It was a very, for me personally, it was a very intense time because the band worked on the record for a year, with the band sort of breaking up as the record was being worked out, and then we went on tour for 11 months, and that was, Sharon Osbourne was our manager briefly, and then quit, and we had a big falling out. So and the band wasn't really doing well. Nobody really understood what we were doing conceptually, which was, the idea was we were supposed to be playing versions of ourselves. I continued to play an alternate version of myself, while my band members continued to play a version of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up looking very, very strange in the whole thing. There were all these articles written about me that I was going totally insane. You had the New York Times making fun of me for losing my mind, not realizing, really, most people didn't realize that it was like a big elaborate stage play that was acting out in front of the world.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, it seems very meta, and now it seems very meta and very kind of, Bowie-esque forward thinking. But at the time, it was seen as somebody just destroying their career. So it was a very intense time for me. So to basically spend the last month of the band's, what I thought would be the band's existence in November, December of 2000, basically finishing a bunch of music by myself, and then dumping it out, and then suddenly everybody loves us again. It was a very strange time. It's hard to remember even how things connected, which made going back to the work, 20 something years later, and trying to forensically put it all back together into a cohesive musical vision, even remembering what I was thinking at the time, aesthetically and idealistically. That was difficult for me to kind of put myself back in the headspace, because it was such a difficult time.
Do you frequently tinker with older releases? Like the recent, Melancholy box sets of the last 10, 15 years, there's slight differences between the 2012 and the 2014 version. Is that something you get involved with at all?
I'm involved with everything that the band puts out, I guess. First of all, I produced everything that the band did, like during the heyday. And then through the various iterations, starting again in 2007 up until current day, which I guess you could argue the band has been back as a business since 2007. So that's 18 years. Yeah. And then the reissues, my fingerprints on everything. I don't turn anything over to anybody.
Got it. Okay. All right. Because you were saying how much better some of these sounded in the remaster. So it does sound like you're a very deep listener, and the final QA for all of these products.
Sound has always been very, very important to us collectively, but to me particularly. But pressing records was not in the 1990s. Was not. I mean, we had to beg, and I mean beg in capital letters, beg Virgin Records to put out vinyl of Siamese Dream in 1993. They laughed at us and said nobody cares about vinyl.
Right.
And now, of course, they're all collector's items. So vinyl manufacturing in the 1990s was hardly, any kind of high fidelity type of exercise, particularly on the rock side.
Yeah.
So, there are certain limitations. The technology in particular with digital mastering has gotten so much better that the ability to clarify and clean up some of the noise floor off of analog tapes, everything. I mean, I think there's just such supremacy in sound right now. Now you can argue it's gone too far the other way, but when you're dealing with something like Machina, which was a very, very darkly recorded album on purpose, to go back and basically bring it into the modern world and kind of wipe the grime off it and show people the beautiful colors that are in, I think it will be very shocking to people to hear this record. Howie Weinberg did the new mastering as well, and I think it's might be the greatest mastering job he's ever done for us. It brought me to tears. I sent it to Jimmy Chamberlain. It brought him to tears. It's a stunningly kind of crazy body of work, but sonically it really holds up as a kind of a one-of-a-kind thing.
So hearing this and kind of understanding, a bit about you from the outside, I would imagine there was immense frustration with the original vinyl pressing of Melancholy, the 3-disc version where everything was kind of out of order.
No, it was purposely out of order.
Oh, okay.
No, I did that. I did that for a variety of reasons. That was an artistic. In fact, I had to fight the record company on that as well.
Okay.
No, it has I think it has 2 additional tracks. The order was purposely changed for a variety of reasons, partially because of the addition of the 2 extra songs. we didn't have, the vinyl version of that record is fine. It's kind of a document, but I wouldn't necessarily argue it's high fidelity. No.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
All the mastering focus in the mid '90s, particularly, was on MTV and CDs.
Right.
You weren't thinking in the back of your. I mean, look, these days, because of the amount of vinyl that people are selling, there's a almost like a renewed focus on the art of cutting, mastering for records.
Right.
But in the '90s, it would be like you do everything, and you'd be like, oh, what are we going to do with the vinyl? It was like, how
afterthought.
It's how they would say the Beatles wouldn't sit there for the stereo mixes, only the mono mixes.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same type of vibe. You would just be like, oh yeah, whatever, because it was seen as a limited thing. Don't forget, just as a funny aside, and this is classic record company stuff, we had to beg to put Melancholy out on vinyl in 1995, and they said, okay, we'll put out a limited edition. And I don't remember what the original press run was.
5,000.
Okay, thank you. Well, if you notice, there's a lot of copies on the market that have blank white boxes on the front.
They're overpress, yeah.
Well, they blew out of the 5,000 so fast that they just kept pressing copies and conveniently didn't account for them and never asked for permission.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why you'll find those copies with blank white boxes on the front.
So you purposely wanted the different running order on those records. Why was that?
Yeah.
Why was that?
Well, I just thought it's like a stew. If you take that, first of all, you have limitations on how much time you can put on one side of a record before it starts to degrade. So that's part of the consideration. But the other thing is, by adding 2 songs, you change the story a little bit.
Okay, all right. So it's to aid the narrative. So do you prefer the 1996 vinyl version sequence above the normal one, the regular one that most of us are used to?
Honestly, I don't prefer any of them.
Okay.
I still think the record's a bit too long.
Mm-hmm.
I remember being online, early days of being online, when I actually took the time to read people's comments, and I remember people saying that Siamese was a far better record than Melancholy, and what I really realized was what they were saying was the narrative of Melancholy was not as clear to them as the narrative of Siamese Dream. And so with that mindset, I think if like when we made Melancholy, we were thinking of albums like The Wall and the White Album, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, those albums are not as long as Melancholy, you know what I mean?
Right.
We made a much longer record thinking we were making the same type of length record. I think the White Album's only 18, 19 songs, if I'm correct. I could be wrong, but so it's just too long. I think it's 28 songs long. It would have been much more effective as a work of art, I think, if it had been sort of 23, 24.
Yeah, but on the first version of the record, you actually squeezed 2 more in there. That was important at the time.
Well, my argument was people, as a record person myself, I thought it made it more valuable because there were unreleased tracks.
Yeah. Well, it certainly is a collector's item. I'm sure there's a lot of your records that are quite dear, very hard to get these days. Are you aware, like the Airplane Flies High, the vinyl version from 2013, $500, $800 is not uncommon for that record?
Honestly, hand over heart, I have no idea. I don't really check that stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There's a variety of reasons for that. I'm not going to pretend that, I live in a castle or something. I just don't pay attention much to that stuff. Because invariably it in my community, I guess you call my fan community, it gets into some sort of weird guilt trip at some point.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm responsible. I'm responsible for the bootlegs.
Yeah.
There's a lot of bootlegs coming out of Europe, Eastern Europe right now of records that are out of print. Zeitgeist, for example.
Mm-hmm.
I go in independent record stores and they see me over by the S's and they start to get nervous because they're carrying 6 or 7 bootlegs in my albums, not me live on the radio in Belgium in '94. I'm talking like actual albums.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a lot of the independent record community right now that's dealing in a lot of vinyl, which I have nothing to do with quality wise, and which are off the market. They're out of print for my own reasons. And we can talk about that if you want, but the point is, so I got fans mad at me about bootlegs. I got fans mad at me about why, the record company I was in business with didn't print more copies of something when I was the one begging them to put it out in the first place. And they were telling me no.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? It's hard to get into, like, let's call it the joy of, like, oh, it's cool. This thing that we made is appreciated or sought after, because invariably, if you follow that rabbit hole down far enough, it leads to somebody being mad at you.
Right. And exclusivity and kind of scarcity leaves a lot of people on the outside. And I can understand why someone would get frustrated. Where they point that frustration is probably misguided if it's to you. But
Listen,
I get that.
When I don't know how many physical pieces of media we have in our archives. At last count, I believe it was over 60,000 pieces of physical media. Okay, when I say physical media, I'm talking about, it could be a hard drive, it could be a DAT tape, it could be a master reel. Okay, so we and I have spent copious amounts of money archiving and cataloging this voluminous archive with the idea that one day we would be able to start sharing it. And we have through MadameZuZus.com. We've released a bunch of things so far and continue to plan. We're about to announce another huge project very soon. And by the time this airs, maybe that will be announced as well. Because the band owns everything not released. Basically, I own everything from 2001, and everything from the 90s the band owns that wasn't released in the 90s.
Right.
So all that physical media I'm talking about, we own. Hundreds of concerts of Melancholy tour, and I mean, we have crazy amounts of archival stuff. And what I'm saying about the reason I'm telling you this is, and this goes back to where I sort of try to tend to avoid the guilt trip, is it costs a lot of money to store that stuff. It costs a lot of money to mine that stuff out and properly mix it. Right now, we're preparing extra tracks for a Melancholy 30th anniversary release through Universal. Tracks from the final U.S. tour in 1986 of the original band. I'm over here writing new songs. I'm spending a lot of time in my day trying to reproduce music from 30 years ago, and I love it. It sounds fantastic, and I'm excited to share it. So the reason where I'm going with all this is, when I first started telling our fan community the amount of archival material that we had, and how one day I really look forward to sharing it. And eventually I had to build a business to actually be able to share it, because the record companies really had no interest in these materials. And we're doing a lot of really good business, and the fan community is very happy with what we've been doing. But in those intervening 20 or so years, I would get these people saying, you should just put it all out for free.
Wow.
And then we had a mole who was doing a lot of archiving for us, dump a bunch of materials that were unreleased out in the market. And we had to get the FBI involved. So there's no sour grapes here. What I'm trying to tell you is it's a complicated thing to own and control your own archives and try to figure out a modality, as somebody who loves to collect music of bands that I love, to try to create a modality by which we can share this music with fans who are really committed to us and still want to hear, the first time we played the Adore songs at the Viper Room in 1998, where James and I both took the stage and played solo acoustic sets.
Yeah.
That type of stuff. It's a real joy to share that. And I love talking about the business of making music and the business of even making records. But there's always this kind of underlying kind of proletariat thing that goes on, which is like, dude, I can get all this stuff on Internet Archive for free and you should just dump it out. Well, what about the art of the cover? And what about the art of the art? And what about the cool edition? And what about the track that hasn't been bootlegged? That cost me a bunch of money to find and pull out and mix and remix and deal with the politics and the fan complaining in Holland because of the tariffs. So again, no sour grapes here. I'm just trying to illustrate that this is why I don't pay attention to the current record market around the band, because it's hard to stay in the wow, that's amazing part of it, because invariably it leads to somebody complaining that they can't afford. They really, really want this OG copy of Machina, but somehow it's my fault that there's only X number of copies on the market.
Yeah. Yeah, it breaks down. It can get pretty silly. No, I recognize that. So
sorry, that was too long an answer, but
no, I totally get it. And yeah, I can see where there's a lot of hidden costs, and not a lot of them that are not so hidden. And dumping them out is one thing, but you want to make them sound good. You want to have them represented well. Did you guys record just about every gig you did from the 90s on up?
There are, I think I have somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 DATs board tapes of the band playing live in 93, 94. we probably have somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 to 200 concerts of the band playing live on the Melancholy tour. I'm pretty sure we recorded every night of the Adore tour, which was only 5 months long, but I've never gone through those archives yet. So yeah, there's so much stuff. It almost boggles the mind, and at times it's intimidating because, for example, with the request of Universal to find some live materials for a 30th anniversary Melancholy thing. Well, where do you start if you have 150 to 200 concerts on? By the way, ADAT, which is not not a perfect format for live concerts, but it was cheap and it allowed us to record a ton of stuff. Where to even start? Are you listening to 50 versions of Bullet with Butterfly Wings? Are you picking the best one, or are you picking a period of time and saying we're just going to focus on this period of time and let's just kind of see something that's representative of this period?
I'm curious as to the archive that you have. I would imagine there's not just music, but also different things, stage setups, the original Zero shirt. What are some interesting bits that are in the archive?
Not as much that type of stuff as you might imagine. My focus was always on the recorded side, and part of that was my father was a musician, and I knew my dad was a musician when I was young. But as I got older and I was interested in his musical life, I would ask him, "Hey, do you have tapes of this or that?" And he had literally nothing. So it seemed to spur something in me that I didn't want to be that guy to turn someday and say, "Oh, I wish you could have heard me on stage and so. It was so great."
All right, so it's mainly music. There's a few other releases I wanted to quickly get into. You had, in 2010, there was some Record Store Day singles. Astral Planes and Would Awake My Mind, 250 copies each. One was sold exclusively at Amoeba in Hollywood, the other at Vintage Vinyl in Illinois. You recall these, I assume?
Sorta.
Yeah.
There was a really negative vibe in the fan community at the time. So what makes it even funnier is that a lot of people rejected buying those when they were readily available at the time.
Okay.
I can remember calling Steve from Vintage Vinyl, maybe a month after we gave them to him, and he was like, "Yeah, I still got some copies." It wasn't like the fans went, "Oh, I mean, we would have 3,000 comments on something, but it wasn't like 200 fans called up Vintage Vinyl and ordered their copy from Steve." So my point was that there was this contentious thing where there was almost like this weird boycott going on of me at the time because I was the only person left in the band from the original band. So the scarcity of some of those materials had nothing to do with high demand. They had everything to do with the fact that nobody cared at the time. When I say nobody, that's hyperbolic. It wasn't the response you would expect. So those things have become collectible because they weren't designed. It's like a Psych single that came out and wasn't a hit, and because they didn't press more copies, now it's in high demand. It kind of falls more into that category.
Oh, yeah, and those are absolutely, well, their day has come, and they are very much sought after. I'm lucky to have one of them.
Oh, wow. Cool.
But yeah, history has caught up with them and proven those people who bought them on the day quite astute. Do you think there's ever going to be a reissue of Zwan in the future?
Yes. In fact, all the materials have been digitally transferred, and it's all sitting there for me to go through. And I would be going through them now if I wasn't up to my ears with the Machina box set release. This other thing that's coming out archivally that I can't talk about, but is a massive project that took a ton of time to prepare. And then also anyway, you've heard it all. I mean, there's a lot going on, and I'm writing new music, and I'm about to go on solo tour, and then the Pumpkins are touring Europe this summer as well.
And you got a book and a podcast and
a new baby and 2 other kids below the ages of 10. So we're very grateful. I mean, it's a very exciting time. If I could speak about it from a personal perspective, it's an exciting time because the interest in the band's music is very high again. The interest in different periods of my life that at the time were disregarded or sort of shoved aside are now being seen in a different light. So there seems to be a coming together and a full circle effect happening where it's all seeming to gather momentum in a way that I couldn't have anticipated. Like I just told you, what was it, 15 years ago? Here I am giving, my buddy Steve at Vintage Vinyl, some copies. I was like, "Would you sell these for me?" "Sure," and he put them right up there on the front counter, and we let it be known online, and there they sat, So to go in 15 years from people disregarding, a 7-inch release, that obviously wasn't a lot of money, to you telling me that something that we did not even that long ago was worth $700 to $800. It's kind of mind-boggling. It's very humbling. I'm very passionate about my musical life, and sometimes it comes off the wrong way, because I'm not a particularly secure person in life. But as a musician, I always tried to chase after my heroes and try to live up to the shadow that they cast on me. A lot of that had to do with the fact that my father wasn't successful. I wanted to, I don't know, maybe have the type of musical life that he never had. So it's cool to talk about it from the perspective of collecting and music making, because honestly, even though it's something I've rarely talked about, it's something that's really driven me to care about the quality, to care about the B-side, to care about, the fan like me in a record store at some point, and give them some value for their money, because they're digging through a crate, to reward them for that digging through the crate. Because that was me, and that was me working at that record store. I saw that happen, and I saw where that is a magical thing that can happen between an artist and somebody who's interested.
Well, and that's the vibe I've always kind of picked up, because there's been a lot of evidence around that you in particular were very, I guess, aware of the collecting community, and not collectors in terms of buying something to resell at a higher price. But for example, Adore on mono, the original pressing was on mono, which I read as, this is a guy who really likes his records and he understands the power of mono. What do you recall about that? I mean, I imagine that was from your hand directly.
Yeah. Again, at this point, we'd sold enough vinyl over the previous 3 records that the record company was interested in. Of course, we were coming off of Melancholy, so they were happy to put out whatever the hell we wanted to put out at that time. But that isn't to say that they were particularly interested in the vinyl. So the fact that I said, okay, I want to do something different and put out a mono copy of the record, I mean, they could have cared less.
Right.
There was nobody saying, well, shouldn't you put out a stereo copy too? And they didn't give 2 shits. So I went to Flood, who was helping me mix the record at the time, and I said, I'd like to do a mono copy. And he was like, oh my God, we're so behind time. Can't we just fold it in and call it mono and whatever. And I said, no, we have to actually do mono mixes. So we did specific mono mixes. And honestly, it's been a while since I listened, but at the time, and when we put out the box set with in recent times, I guess 15 years ago, we included the mono version of the album in the box set. And the reason we did that is because I actually think the mono version of the record is more emotionally close to the record that I wrote. It's spookier. The stereo is beautiful, and Flood did some amazing mixes on that. But the mono has this kind of ghostly thing that you can only get with mono.
Okay. So there is a mono mix in the box set on LP.
I think it was only on CD. I think the compromise we reached, because the box sets were so sprawling, was we would put key components on vinyl, and then the additional materials would be on CD or something. Right. I apologize for not knowing more of this.
That's
stuff.
okay.
It's been a while.
I'm in Austin right now. I'm about to go to the Austin Record Fair, and that's something I'm going to look to bring home, is a mono copy of Adore. I'm very curious to hear that in mono. Anyway, Billy, thank you so much for joining us here on the Vinyl Guide. We look forward to all the different box sets and the other surprises you have coming out.
Oh, thank you so much. It was fun to talk about this stuff. Thanks again.
Okay, man. Cheerio.
Oh, man, that was so lovely of him to come on the show. Again, don't forget the Billy Corgan and the Machines of God box set, which will be live for pre-order. I believe June 27th is the date that he's putting out there. It's best to follow Madame ZuZu's on your social medias to see what's going on there. But it's a huge deal. That box set sounds incredible. I can't wait to get my hands on one. Thank you again, Billy. And again, everyone, do not forget, we've got a lot going on the month of June 2025. Episode 500 has several more weeks to go. Follow this podcast in your podcast app. Every Monday is going to be an incredible new name. And don't forget, we're giving away 30 killer and collectible records. Enter to win at thevinylguide.com/500. That's the numbers, 500. Thevinylguide.com/500. Enter. You can see what we're giving away on Instagram at Vinyl Guide. But you got to enter your information if you want a chance at getting a box of some interesting records arriving to your house. thevinylguide.com/500. Follow the podcast. We'll be back shortly with a brand new episode. And thanks again for listening to The Vinyl Guide. Tell your friends, homies, and enemies about this show. Mwah. See you soon. Cheers.